And we have as our first panel of witnesses Dr. Lashley, Fabrice Ville, Quebec Native Women Association, Vivian Michel, and Leah Serrier. Let me just open it with Dr. Lashley for 7 minutes. 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît. You'll have to take yourself off mute.
Thank you very much.
This is the big challenge of us all, muting and unmuting. Once we've solved this, we can launch something to the moon. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members, and fellow panelists. I am very honored to have been asked to address you, and in this manner, continue to serve my adopted country. Chair, in 1829, based on 9 guiding principles, Sir Robert Peel created the first modern and professional police force. The 7th principle is based on the understanding that since the police are taken from members of society, the population is in fact policing itself. In Peel's words, the police are the public and the public are the police. It has been recognized both academically and anecdotally that systemic racism and discrimination are part of society with roots embedded in 17th century colonialism. This type of racism and discrimination is based on the premise of white supremacy, which is manifested in practices and policies which award unearned privileges to white people based on their pigmentation, while automatically denying those same privileges to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, commonly referred to as BIPOC. Since the police are a subset of the population, it follows that any issues found in said population will be found within the police. Given this, it does not make sense that the discussion of whether systemic racism and discrimination is found within the police is still ongoing. The police are the public, and the public are the police. Peel's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th principles address the need for the police to remember not only do they require the support, consent, and cooperation of citizens to operate effectively, but that physical force must only be employed when all else fails. The application of this mindset is advantageous to both police and citizens. It forces all police to use methods of mediation, de-escalation, and other humanistic approaches before resorting to force. And it sends a message to citizens that interactions with police do not always have to be adversarial, but can and should be based on mutual respect and cooperation. In other words, the police are not soldiers at war with citizens, and citizens are not guerrilla fighters trying to outwit the enemy. The police must not represent a force with which citizens must reckon. They must instead represent a service which is being proffered. However, since power resides in the police and trust between police and citizens is questionable, the police will have to take the lead in instituting change and demonstrating goodwill. They will have to start through honest introspection, openness, and acceptance, both institutionally and personally. This will mean coming to terms with what Sarah Ahmed refers to as whiteness, which, it should be pointed out, is not about persons, but about an ideology which has entrapped all of us by favoring a hegemony which favors one group absolutely, harms all others by trying to force them into that hegemonic mold and punishing them for something which they cannot possibly attain. Chair, let us work together to dismantle whiteness, hold fast to our humanity, and in so doing, never forget the Pelian principle that the police are the public and the public are the police. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, Dr. Lashley. And I wish that colleagues would take note of the economy of speech by Dr. Lashley, and then we can get through all of our questioning. So our next witness is Fabrice Ville. Welcome, sir. You are on mute at this point. You have 7 minutes. The translators have asked us to ask you to bring your microphone up to closer to your mouth, only because we have not been able to run a test, a sound test on you. But nevertheless, 7 minutes, sir.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. And from the outset, I'd like to point out that I will be making my remarks in French, but during the question and comment period, testing English translation, 1, 2, 3. English interpretation. While I activated the button, you should be receiving the interpretation, I assume. I'm sorry for the logistic challenges here. So what I was saying then is that I'm more than happy to take questions in either English or French, but that I'll be making my remarks in French. And I'd like to start by thanking you for this invitation to speak to you today. I also apologize for the lack of decorum here. I'm in an infirmary. It's the only place that I have a connection that enables me to be with you today. But having said that, well, at any rate, and the third thing I'd like to say is that I didn't send in any speaking notes. However, I would be more than happy to send them to the clerk so that the information is submitted. My comments are my comments. I don't know everything when it comes to systemic racism in policing institutions. I realize that it's a privilege that I have today to be able to speak to you, and I hope that I can honor the duty that's been given to me in doing so. The first thing that I'd like to say is that even if racism can be perceived or considered a crime, or it's motivated by crime, it's a crisis, a multi-factor crisis like climate change. We're all responsible for it. And I say this because in common terms, people are accused of being racist, of racism. And when we talk about climate change, for example, we talk about it as something that we can speak about. It's something we're all responsible for. We're responsible for driving, for public policy, for composting. And that's what enables us to take a deep dive into what it is, into what racism is, beyond intentional actions, beyond hatred. So it's just the point or the tip of the iceberg of the issue. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about systemic racism, to my mind. I'd also like to add that systemic racism isn't something that's more prevalent in police forces, but it's more visible in police forces because police officers have control and authority and power for physical constraint that other members of society don't have. So I put that before you, saying that we are here where we are because police forces have a specific impact on people's lives and on their physical and psychological integrity. Now, I'd like to talk about or tell you an anecdote. On June 24th, on St. John Baptist Day, there were 5 young people, Yvonne, Max, Melville, and Sasha, and one other, who are part of a collective. They're mentored by an individual who has been mentoring them for over 5 years and who helps them to visit places where that are not accessible to young Black people, and all kinds of places, including museums. And for the past 7 years, Ricardo has been mentoring these young people, and he gets them to think about issues that we see in society. So on the evening of the 24th of June, these young people wanted to use the BC bikes, the bikes in Montreal, but the codes to unlock the bikes that could be borrowed weren't working. So were trying to fix the problem, but in less than 10 minutes, there wasn't 1, 2, but 3 police cars that stopped to step in. Now, the young people remain traumatized by this situation because Ricardo Lamour had already accompanied these young people to tell them how to react if this type of situation were to occur. But that's a situation that shouldn't happen to any Canadian. But that brings us to the following question. What can we do to ensure that the police's role goes from one of repression to one where they're serving people? Because for our community, that's not what's happening. In many cases, the police is responsible for repression. So from the outset, despite any goodwill in the very makeup of the police forces, they have this control function and they have an impact on people. And now there are a host of factors that I could talk about here, but when we talk about the fact that Howard Saper, the correctional investigator, determined that between 2003 and 2013, the prison population for Indigenous people went up 46%. 90% of there were increases up to 96% for others as well. How did this happen? What occurred? There are many visible minorities in large Canadian cities. And, well, let me rephrase that. According to Jason Carmichael, the amount of police in a large city is based on the visible minorities who live there. So when we look at the systems that we're working in, we see this repression. It's very pertinent. Now, I see that I'm being asked to wrap up my remarks, but I'd just like to take another 30 seconds to summarize. Now, if we were to move the police from an organization involved in repression to one that serves society, and we think about others, victims who have died because of mental health issues. These types of situations shouldn't have had police involvement. It should have been community organizations that stepped in to help them. Now, when we look at defunding, the idea of defunding the police, well, I think we need to reflect on all of these factors. When we look at the UK, we
got you off there. Unfortunately, you're well over time. You obviously studied the techniques of Mr. Harris for extending your periods of time. Your remarks, I'm sure, can be worked into the question and answer period. So I apologize for cutting you off, but we unfortunately are stuck with a pretty tight timeline here. Finally, Quebec Native women. Who will be speaking on behalf of the Quebec Native women? Madame Michaud? Okay. If you unmute yourself, 7 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for including us as part of this process. It's very difficult to do everything in 7 minutes, but I'll have to read very quickly. Racism is a historical process that depends on social structures based on prejudices about certain groups or individuals. It becomes systemic when the institutions of a social structure reproduce discriminatory behavior towards certain individuals or groups of individuals in society based on race or here on the fact of being Indigenous. By reproducing it in these institutions, what it does is normalize discrimination and crystallize it. Systemic racism towards First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people is closely linked to colonialism, which has perpetuated a vision, an imagination, and prejudices about Aboriginal people without distinction of peoples and nations or about Aboriginal women. Patriarchal social structures were imposed and led to systemic discrimination against women and especially Indigenous women. They were imposed by colonial agents, namely through policies and legislation, such as the Indian Act. With these social structures were imposed the notions of superiority of culture and economy of the settlers, and consequently the inferiority of those of Indigenous people and Indigenous people themselves. While colonialism affected men and women, it did not affect them in the same way. The process of colonialization was a gendered process, producing insidious stereotypes about Indigenous women and objectifying them. As a result, Indigenous women were doubly discriminated against, since racism in particular was compounded by sexism. These stereotypes stem from the European view of Aboriginal women as savages, shameless, bad mothers, ugly, incapable of feeling, not having any morals. These behaviors were deemed deviant, justified by many policies, the most significant of which is the Indian Act, a law that discriminates against women and carries into the present stereotypes of Aboriginal women that predate Confederation. Among other things, this law conveys the idea that the identity of Aboriginal women and their descendants are not as worthy of consideration as Aboriginal men and their descendants. Since the legislation, including the Indian Act, represents the official view of Canada, it has allowed for an internalization of sexism and racism. Stereotypes are virtually immune to social influences that might challenge or erode them. Finally, because they are affirmed by law, they allow the justification and continuation of the oppression of Aboriginal women today, who are not considered equal to other members of society. Colonialism, systemic racism, and sexism are factors in the marginalization of Aboriginal women, both within their communities and within colonial society. One of the consequences of this marginalization has been to make Aboriginal women disproportionately and systemically vulnerable to violence and death. They face a disproportionately large amount of this, and this is because of the justification. Racism and sexism against women are also present in police forces and show their face in the form of abuse of discretionary power. According to international law and the International UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, there is an obligation and a responsibility by the government and state to ensure that police officers protect people, especially Aboriginal women. There must also be public mechanisms for protection. But what happens when these agents of state are at cause? It is the responsibility of state actors to ensure that sanctions are imposed. Not only do police officers have discretionary power that is too broad when it comes to the arrest of Aboriginals and Aboriginal women, which also often results in violence. In fact, what we've seen and heard recently in the NFADA report and in testimony provided by Quebec women at various committees and commissions, there is too much police abuse. Inappropriate action, threats, among others. People in the position of authority are a tangible illustration of systemic racism. This testimony also shows that these Indigenous women are more often victims than non-Indigenous women when it comes to sexual violence, among other things. There have been abusive arrests and discriminatory arrests as well. This stems and flows from the power that police have because the justice system does not treat Indigenous women the same. Indigenous women are constantly stigmatized by the justice system. They are often identified as women with problems such as women who have substance abuse issues. So the system to protect them is flawed, and the proof is that women from First Nations have many psychological problems, that they require assistance and psychological and medical assistance. Even when an Indigenous woman calls 911 for a situation, some 17 police officers are often sent in. There is a woman who was killed as a result of a wellness check, killed by a police officer. So the relationship between Indigenous women, Aboriginal women, and police officers is problematic. The behavior inadequate to reactions must be taken into account in the understanding of this phenomenon. Families no longer have confidence in the police because of their indifference and misbehavior. And FADA has collected numerous testimonies exposing the sexist stereotypes that are attached to missing Aboriginal women and girls. When it comes to the services that they wanted to make.
You wind up your remarks. I apologize for interrupting you.
Je vais terminer. Non, okay.
And I will conclude with some recommendations. We need structural change. We need an action plan, concrete measures taken into account to counter systemic racism, systemic violence, and police impunity against Aboriginal women by adopting an intersectoral approach which takes into account all the discrimination faced by Aboriginal women and the fact that this discrimination reinforces other discrimination. We also need to see measures that take into account Aboriginal women. This will require training and sensitization of the police to the justice system.
These are extremely profound issues. And I just take note for the sake of the witnesses that when you don't complete what you wanted to say, the testimony that any written work that you have can be sent to the clerk of the committee, and it forms the part of the record of the committee. So it's not lost. With that, I'm going to start our 6-minute round. It's Mr. Palus for 6 minutes, Mr. Fergus, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Harris. Mr. Palus, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes, please. Mr. Chair, it's Mr. Vidal.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vidal will start for us.
Okay, Mr. Vidal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Anna de Sandegri said this morning, a number of the people sitting on this committee today are members of the INAN committee. And over the last several months, we've been doing a study on the government's response to COVID-19. And one of the things that we've talked about is the supports for Indigenous people that do not live on reserve. So those that live in urban centers, we've done a bunch of discussion around the work of the National Association of Friendship Centers and some other groups that serve urban Indigenous populations. So in that context, my question is for Madame Michelle. Do you agree, or would you agree that in the context of that percentage of Indigenous people living off reserve in urban centers, that declaring First Nation policing as an essential service may not represent the needs of that population as well as it would some of the people that live out in the reserve settings?
C'était moi répondre? Est-ce que c'est mon temps de répondre?
Is
Is it my turn to answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Bon, écoutez, je suis vraiment...
All right, I agree. But I think the legal system should be improved. The legal system plays a great role. We're talking about police forces, and they use racial profiling. They arrest people, their abuses of power. When they do unacceptable acts, for instance, a woman who was distressed, she had a conversation with a professional in Montreal, and in the end, that woman accepted that an emergency vehicle comes. That woman was suicidal. Someone called 911. And what does the 911 service does? They send 17 police vehicles. We're talking about someone who's distressed. We're not talking about a woman who's trying to murder anyone. So that is an example of racism, discrimination, and racial profiling. There is a lot to do when it comes to police forces, especially in those types of cases. When you look at the report, Emery, 11% of women are arrested in big cities, and that for no reason, just because they look Indigenous. Isn't that discrimination or racism? That is racism and discrimination, systemic racism and discrimination, big time. So even though we train people, I think that if you want to be a good person and protect people, then do another job. Our women need protection. They need to be able to feel safe, but that is not the case. I think Mr. Picard is going to talk to you about the differences between Indigenous police force and city police forces, because there is a huge financial funding gap, rather.
I'm going to follow up with another question for you. I think there's a great difference as well between the needs of Indigenous women in maybe very large centers and some of the small and medium-sized communities throughout Quebec and also all of Canada. Sometimes we forget the realities that some of the smaller urban centers, again, they don't fall in that on-reserve category, but they're not in the large cities as well. Would you maybe just speak to some of the solutions that you maybe would suggest for people that live in those small and medium-sized communities as well?
Yes, it'll be my pleasure. At Femmes Autochtones du Québec, we do a lot of popular education, and the word reserve has not been used for decades. We talk about communities just to give you that piece of information. We're called communities. So within those communities, we have a lot to do. If we talk about spousal violence or abuse, well, we're asked to denounce to why. Well, one of the problems that we have in case of domestic violence is that the Aboriginal police officer, well, we all know each other within the community, but the police officer is sometimes the brother of the aggressor. So you see the trouble we can bump into. So we don't have many police officers, and I know that Mr. Picard will talk about this. At the same time, family relationships, and we know each other very, very well. Everybody knows one another. And sometimes the victim doesn't want to press charges because it's the brother of the aggressor, of her husband, who will come. So that's the problem we have in the communities. In Quebec, we have 54 communities. Not all 54 have their own Aboriginal police bodies. Recently, I read a Mohawk Nation report that said that for years there was no death in the community. So that's a great example.
To leave it there again, it seems to fall to me to interrupt you, Madame Michel, which is not a favorite thing of mine to do. Mr. Vidal's time is up. We are now on to Madame Demoff. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for appearing today. I'm not going to have time to ask all of you questions, but I'm going to start with Les Femmes Autochtones du Québec. My first ask is, if Indigenous women face unique challenges when it comes to policing. And I mean, there's a lack of resources. Indigenous women are the fastest growing prison population in Canada. It's appalling. So there's a lack of resources for them. Sometimes police are not necessarily the right ones to be responding to calls. And I'm wondering if you could provide the committee in writing your recommendations for concrete actions that we could take on that. My specific question is, we had earlier the head of the Complaints Commission from the RCMP appear. I'm wondering if the Indigenous women that you serve file complaints against the RCMP, and if not, why not?
Great questions. Well, with regards to the recommendations, we actually sent you the document I read earlier. But at the same time, well, we will send the two briefs that we tabled, that we sent. One on the Aboriginal women and girls, and one on the CERP, the Provincial Commission, where we sent another brief. And both these briefs contain recommendations. So at Femmes Autochtones, we want to act on the judicial system because it is written with problems. With regards to the RCMP, there is a lack of confidence with everything that we're going through, and that's our challenge as an Aboriginal organization. We want to reestablish trust towards the justice system, towards the police. We'll talk about 2015 and police brutality in Val d'Or. We'll talk about Aboriginal women.
Limited time. Do they file complaints though, and if they're not filing complaints, why are they not filing complaints?
They don't file complaints because they're afraid. It's the Goliath against David fight, but it's quite something to file a complaint. We just filed a complaint to Human Rights with the Square Cabot and the 17 police officers as an organization, as an organization, we can file a complaint against those police officers who act in a way that is inadmissible.
Heard earlier that there were only 76 complaints that had to do with racism, and I suspect it's because the complaints aren't filed as opposed to that there aren't more issues involved. Mr. Ville, first I want to commend you for your work. Joëlle Lightbound, who couldn't join us today, the Parliamentary Secretary for Public Safety, has spoken very highly of the work that you do. One of the things that concerns me is in Canada it costs $100,000 a year to incarcerate an offender. So that doesn't even include the other costs involved in the criminal justice system, policing and the court costs. We put an awful lot of money into the back end once someone reaches the criminal justice system, but very little money into the preventative work, like the work that you do in the community. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to the importance of that front end investment and whether we should be putting more money into proactive programs to divert youth from coming in contact to the criminal justice system versus spending all of this money once they come in contact with the criminal justice system.
Merci.
Thank you for your question. So briefly, I'll talk about the work that I do, or part of the work that I do. We're an organization that trains trainers who work with young people, disenfranchised young people, racialized young people in Montreal. First of all, we need to take things or have a more broad perspective, see how our public policies that become programs invest in our communities to avoid, as you said, that our youth be involved with the police and the justice system. So we need to invest at the provincial level and federal level. But also, we need to see how we can reallocate funds that are allocated to police bodies, allocate them somewhere else. We hear we should defund the police. Well, this is not an aberration in itself, but annually, at the provincial, municipal, and federal level, we question our budgets in education, transportation. We never question budgets allocated to the police. In Montreal, I think that the police budget has increased tremendously. It represents $365 million, 11% of the overall City of Montreal budget. So if you look at the fact that Aboriginal women in Montreal are stopped 11 times more often than white women, so that begs the question, why? Why do we allocate public funds to police officers in that situation? Couldn't we reallocate these funds at the community level? There's a debate on body cams right now. These cameras have shown that they have no impact on the level of violence. So we'll invest more money in those.
I seem to be having to cut people off, which I really find frustrating. It's the end of Madame Damo's time. With that, I'm going to ask Madame Michaud for her 6 minutes, please. Again, I apologize.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for your presentation. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Ville for all the work that he does. And congratulations for Briser le Code by Mr. Sauvé. A lot of work, great work's being done in the community in Quebec right now. I'll give you time to finish what you wanted to say. You're talking about racism. What we've been hearing is a multifactorial crisis. So we need to do more training. We need to train police officers. We need to train them better, at least. How should we broach that subject when we train police officers? How should we broach racism when we train police officers? Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for giving me the time to complete my answer, what I was saying earlier. So we're adding solutions that add to the budget, but those solutions are not efficient. When we want to fight against drug addiction, well, we need to invest to do some preventative work. We also talk about training people with regards to unconscious biases. The police, being as repressive as it is, I think we need to go further. As Madame Michel was saying, we can't just go with training. That is not enough. I'm not an expert in police training either, but in the United Kingdom, we see that routine police officers are not armed. Could we not explore that avenue in Canada and maybe just limit weapons to certain tactical units? That could have avoided many deaths, like the ones of Mr. Magloire, Mr. Gibbs, and Mr. Corioran. So we should take away police officers' weapons, no matter what training is given to them. I've had talks with a police officer on this issue, and he told me, Mr. Ville, you need to understand how stressful it is for the police officer when he takes his or her weapon and feels threatened. It's very stressful. And I understand that, but elsewhere in the world, they found other ways to act. So we need to go beyond training. Funds that are allocated to police could be reallocated elsewhere. And that's where we need to do something. It's important.
Très intéressant ce que vous...
Very interesting. I think you're the first one to mention this. And I thank you. I'm sorry, I have one more thing to mention. All I'm doing right now is to bring you, and I hope other people will do the same. There are many movements that are asking to defund the police, but sometimes they're seen as not being credible groups. But their message is very credible, though.
Faites un travail.
Thank you. I know you're doing very important work with our youth. I will repost all your work on my social network. It's important. Let's say you're a white youth, a privileged white youth, and you want to become a police officer. What would you tell that youth who will end up in a powerful situation where there could be some authority or power abuse, or might be? What would you tell him? Well, your question is connected to the issue of systemic racism beyond the police body. I'm not well placed to tell a white youth what to do. It's our educators at the primary and secondary level who need to talk about our common history. Racism should become a subject matter in school. Our institutions, our media should stop conveying information that convey racist biases. So my message would be to their parents. Parents, people like you, judges, teachers, people in hospitals. What do they do to create systems, to set up systems for all that to stop? Miss Michel said that the Indian Act was a very racist act. How many times will Madame Michel have to say that? It's not the first time. When will you cancel that act? When you get rid of that law? So how are we going to solve all these issues?
Sorry, Madame Michaud, that your time is up. With that, it's Mr. Harris. 6 minutes, please. Jack, your phone is on, or you're on mute.
So thank you, Chair. My first question is for Madame Michel. You mentioned in your response to a question the situation in Val d'Or, which led to the CERP inquiry, and in a letter to Minister Mark Miller in June, this is referenced and talked about abuses in Val d'Or, including by police officers, including sexual abuses, intimidation, excessive force, and something called starlight tours. Now, I've heard that expression used before in Western Canada in relation to police officers bringing in an inebriated young or inebriated Indigenous person outside of the town and leaving them regardless of the weather. Is that referring to the same thing, or is that something else? I had not heard of it happening outside of this particular situation in Saskatoon.
Yes, I would like to comment on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was in 2015, we had the Anishinaabe women in Val d'Or who denounced police brutality that included sexual assault, use of force, and a geographic cure. So when they stop inebriated Indigenous women, they take them kilometers away and they force them to walk back. We call that the geographic cure in French. These women denounced the situation in 2015. There were 37 files that were opened. And of the 37, with the Independent Investigator's Office, because we sought an independent investigation, only 2 were retained. 1 Indigenous police officer who worked in the north and 1 other non-Indigenous police officer. But the other ones, directly from the Quebec Provincial Police Force, faced no investigation. None of the files were maintained. Is that normal? I put the question to you. Is it normal to see? And in May of this year, a Cree woman sought assistance, called 911. They asked for an ambulance, but 17 police officers showed up with the canine squad. Is that not a concrete example of systemic discrimination and racism? I think so. There's also racial profiling, because when you call 911, you have to identify Indigenous women, inebriated, in distress, and they send in the police.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that and read about the issue regarding the 17 police officers showing up in Montreal as well. And I note that you're unhappy with the results of the CERP study. Can I ask you, and perhaps Professor Lashley could answer, one of the recommendations, the call for justice of the National Inquiry in Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, talks to the establishment of Indigenous civilian organizations to provide oversight on policing across jurisdictions. Can you tell us how you would see that happening, Madame Michel, and perhaps Professor Lashley, if there's time? How would that oversight take? What practical way would that oversight take place?
Bon, évidemment, lorsque on fait
Well, when we're looking at psychological distress, the police officers should not be responding. We should have social services coming in, social workers, for example, who would be there to help. Why the police? She wasn't aggressive. There are also other steps that need to be taken, and with everything that we've identified, there are disciplinary measures that are not being enforced against the police. Why? Because the government doesn't want to get involved in wars with the unions. So it's simply better to close the file quickly because they don't want to get involved in negotiations. Now, when it comes to police intervention, should we tolerate brutal police intervention? We have to ask that question. There are police officers who choose a profession. There are values of security, peace, protection of our fellow citizens. That includes all people from all horizons. And I think that they need to work on their professional ethics sides, on their code of conduct and ethics. It should be enforced and applied because if there is abuse and brutality, disciplinary measures need to be put in place, and that's not the case today. So the door is being open. It's being left open for these people to continue to abuse power.
Unfortunately, that runs out Mr. Harris's 6 minutes. I'm rather hoping that Professor Lashley will be able to weave an answer in at some other point. With that, we're going to our 3-minute round. Mr. Uppel, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for your testimony and adding to our study. I'll start with Dr. Lashley. Do you feel that there is enough collaboration between the federal and provincial governments on mental health support?
There we go. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you very much for your question. I think that it could be better, but I am encouraged by the fact that both levels of government are starting to recognize the importance of mental health. Where I have difficulty is that I don't think that the results, that the mental health difficulties experienced by people who are undergoing the trauma of racism is clearly understood. Racism is bad for your health. It's bad for your health because people end up with hypertension, coronary vascular disease, tremendous mental health difficulties. The pressure of having to constantly maintain the facade of being okay in order to function within a society where the system, not people, but the system is built to be against people of color is very wearying. I mean, Frantz Fanon refers to it as wearing a mask just to get through the day. I don't think that's clearly understood. So yes, on the surface, there is cooperation, possibly not as much as it should be, but people need to understand what the importance of racism is and what it does to the psyche and the physical well-being of the individual.
Thank you. Also, what is the, because we hear about it a lot when the incidents happen and you hear it on the news, but what is the prevalence of suicides in the cases of police interventions? Do you have you looked into that?
No, I haven't. I've looked into other aspects of police intervention and police-citizen relationship, but I haven't looked at the incidence of suicide. What I can tell you is that high anxiety levels, no way to cope with them, fear, those things and depression, which is one of the outgrowths of racism, can result in suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. But I do not know. I cannot answer your question directly. I do not have the answer.
Sure. On another part of on collection of data on racial discrimination in the police, is there a challenge gathering data from all these separate police departments working separately, and what can we do to address this?
I can tell you what happened to me when I wrote my report in 2015 for the SPVM. I had difficulty getting the data. There was almost an attitude of we can't give her this. and I could not enter into their system without their permission. So I was given the data that they allowed me to have. Now, in the Armory report, which came out in October, I had one which came out in November. The Armory report was more, they were able to get access to more data, but even they did not get that access to all the data. And this comes back to one of the questions that was asked before about civilian oversight. I think if you had civilian oversight, which would mean that you had a combination of police plus civilian from different communities, that you would have a better chance of having access to the data. Right now, the data is held. Sorry, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to keep cutting people off because
Mr. Chair.
We have the tyranny of time. Mr. Fergus, 3 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Puis j'aimerais
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses who've come today and made such passionate pleas. We're fortunate as members of this committee to have such informed witnesses before us. To all three of our witnesses, I'm going to ask some questions to Ms. Lashley. First of all, if she could answer with short answers, that will leave me some time to ask a couple of more questions following that. Dr. Lashley, you talked about the police serving the police. You mentioned the quote from Sir Robert Peel in your remarks. Based on your experience with these police in the city of Montreal, is training a significant part of the response, or is it something much deeper than that that's required?
I think it's something much deeper than that. I don't think we need more training. Honestly, I don't think training is going to change anything. We've done a lot of that. As you may know, I was at John Abbott. I was the chair of that department. I was the vice chair of the board of the École nationale de police, and we trained them. It's not training. We need institutional change. That's what we need. The training is there. But if you put people into a system where the ethos is that it's an us against them mentality, the training doesn't matter because they get hooked into that system. They have to work with those people who believe that there's a warrior perspective going on. So I don't think training is the issue. I think you need a fundamental change.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Leslie. Mr. Ville, you and Ms. Michel put forth two examples of extreme, or two examples rather, that show an extreme response to calls that shouldn't have taken place, where so many police officers shouldn't have responded to a call. Do you think, or if you could give us two quick recommendations, things that we can do in order to address the problem of systemic racism, could you put forth two recommendations?
Seconds. I'm not sure how to handle this because I hate to cut off my good friend.
Peut-être, Monsieur le Président, je peux juste dans les 6.
Mr. Chair, maybe during the 6 seconds, I could say that if you want to provide a written response, that would be great, because you cannot invent an answer. You either have to testify or we have to receive written testimonies. So feel free to provide a written answer to the clerk, and it will be taken into consideration in our report.
Fergus.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chair, I will send a written answer. Disciplinary measures in the police force would prevent police brutality and prevent systemic racism as well as racial profiling. Ms. Michel.
Through the chair. We have quaint traditions around here. Mr. Morrison, 3 minutes, please.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to also thank all the witnesses for today. It's been really informative. I do have a question for Dr. Lashley, and I really liked your introduction with Peel. It's amazing, 200 years later, we're still talking about that style of policing with community involvement. But my one question to you is, and it was just actually MP Fergus brought it up, and I just want to know what you think we could do short-term initiatives to address systemic racism today.
Short-term, thank you very much for your question. I think short-term, we have to get police chiefs on board. They have to set the way the rest of the system is going to work. It has to be a top-down approach. I think they have to get back to understanding that they are, in fact, the public, that they are not warriors that's going on. I think that's a short-term thing, that you have to pull them all together and pull them back to understanding what Peel's principles were and why they are important and why they still obtain today. I don't think there's any magic bullet. This is hard work which has to be done.
I agree. Yep. Thank you very much. And again, another question kind of similar to that, Dr. Lashley. It seems to be all the different witnesses we've had, we've come across this, is hiring the right people for law enforcement, for policing, and, and diversity, and hiring, the different cultures, people who understand, who want to be involved with the community. Any recommendations for us to move forward with not only RCMP, but policing all across Canada, which includes our very rural areas as well?
I think it's important that they be asked why they want to go into policing. If they're not going into policing, if you cannot ascertain that they're going into policing to proffer a service, then they shouldn't be policed. If they're going into policing so that they can be in an adversarial position with the public, these are not good policemen by definition. The police are the public, and the public are the police. Someone brought up earlier the fact that if you look at what's going on through Europe, especially if you look at the United Kingdom, only in Northern Ireland do you see police carrying weapons. Yet they have the same people, they solve the same problems, they've got murders, they've got thefts, they've got everything. And I know, Mr. Chair, I'm almost finished. And if you look at Kansas has actually sent police over to Scotland to learn how to do exactly what you just asked me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
I was actually not signaling the end of your time. I had a scratch in the back of my neck.
This is like being at an auction. It's a bid.
Yeah, that's right. Twitch the eyebrow.
There you go, sir.
Okay, Madame Demoff, 3 minutes.
Ms. Demoff, you have 3 minutes.
Madame Demoff has disappeared. You're on mute, Pam.
It's Madame Kara who's next.
Oh, well, my notes say Madame Demoff, but I'm perfectly happy to have Madame Kara. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you, Pam. First and foremost, thank you to all the witnesses for your testimonies. And, your testimonies are certainly extremely significant in addressing these very important and complex issues that, we're looking at addressing systemic racism in policing. Perhaps I'll continue on, the earlier conversation that Dr. Lashley was having on race-based data. We know race-based data collection within policing could be extremely helpful for improving public accountability and informing police policies and practices, such as the use of force. But we also know, I'm sure you know that our government recently announced that Stats Canada will now begin to collect race-based data on the race of victims of crime and people accused of crime. We know that's important, but can you perhaps talk a bit about the considerations that we need to look at on how we use that data so that it isn't used to further reinforce racist stereotypes, and how do we balance that?
Thank you very much for your question. That is indeed the issue. How do you use the data? Because if this data falls into nefarious hands, it can be used to further the cause of racism. So you've got to establish your parameters very, very carefully. You've got to set your criteria very carefully, and you've got to also convince the population, especially, on dit en français, la population des
especially people that are the subject of those data.
Et voilà. And you have to convince them that they are not going to be disadvantaged by this. So before you release it, make sure that you do focus groups as how this will come across, how it will be used. That's very, very important, or you'll end up defeating your cause.
Thank you. How much time do I have, Chair?
Just 45 seconds.
Okay, perhaps I will let Mr. Fabriceville answer my friend Greg's question earlier.
J'aurais 3 mots, en fait.
Thank you for the opportunity. From what I am hearing, I see that some of those things are answering your question. I will send some documents, by the way. But here are things that come to mind. Remove the little power that undermines the police. When you can disarm, just disarm. It is linked to arrests. There is inconsistency between what is allowed and what is not. The Commission of Human Rights in Quebec wants to ban some wrongful arrests. Second element, we have to divest funds. And third, how could the police play a community role? I guess I can send you some documents on that end.
Madame Michaud, 1.5 minutes.
Ms. Michaud.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ville's words, I guess, were agreed by Dr. Lashley. So we talked about public policies as well as our role as elected officials when it comes to the Indian Act. 1 year after the release of the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, there are still some problems. I think we could talk a long time about problems, issues, and sources of systemic racism. So now it is time to act. So what do you expect from the government? What action plan are you expecting for Indigenous women or any other people victims of racism and discrimination? What do you expect from the government? Very good question. Mr. Chair, can I speak?
J'entends que... Monsieur le Président, est-ce que je...
Mr. Chair, can I speak? Do I have the floor?
We're down to about 40 seconds, but go ahead.
June 3rd, 2019, the National Inquiry of Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls released their public. On June 13, we are called by the Minister, Karen Bennett. Many organizations that advocate for Indigenous women's rights, including Quebec Native Women, meet with Minister Bennett in the Senate. We were told about the start of a national action plan. So that there would be also provincial action plan, and that we could all meet once a year to talk about all the work done by the 10 provinces of Canada. That was on June 13, 2019. Now it's July 2020. Listen, it's not because of COVID-19, but the government is not living up to its commitments. They are too slow.
Leave it there. Madame Michaud is well past her time. A minute and a half to Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Lots of questions I could ask all three, but I'd like to give Professor Professor Lashley, I'm sorry, an opportunity to answer my last question, which was, is there a practical way that you can talk about that the Indigenous women, the Indigenous people could have some oversight of police jurisdictions as recommended by the Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women and Girls report?
Thank you very much, sir. I think it's important that the people who are the victims have input into what's going on in their lives. It does not make sense to me that there is none, that things are being done to them and they're just supposed to passively accept it. I think they should be on committees. I think that they should be an oversight committee which is run by citizens and the police, that the police must speak with the citizens, that the police must confer. They must make they must come up with strategies together. They must have strategies together which are accepted by the women and which are accepted by the police. But it comes back to the seventh principle, which is that the police are the public and the public are the police. They've got to work together or this will never get done. It will always be adversarial. So yes, there's a big role for women to play in this, for Native women to play. Absolutely.
That's a very good note on which to end this discussion. I thank each of the witnesses for their contribution. I apologize once again for cutting you off from time to time, but as I say, we are under the tyranny of time here. And speaking of which, so with that, I'm going to suspend, but I'm suggesting to colleagues, as you know, it is Friday afternoon. We have staffing issues with respect to where we are here in the House of Commons. And I'm suggesting that on the next round of questions, I take a minute off everybody in order to be able to try and do some justice to the staff. Is that, unless I'm meeting with wild objections and Mr. Harris threatening an invasion from Newfoundland, I think that's what I'm going to do. So with that, we're suspended. Mr. Sauvé first, President Sauvé first. I just so I don't have to keep interrupting you. You have 7 minutes. Around 5 minutes, I'll just kind of do this, and around 6 minutes, I'll kind of do this, and I kind of give you some indication of trying to wind up your remarks. So if you just kind of keep an eye on the screen, with that, I'll ask Mr. Sauvé to lead with 7 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to appear today. My name is Brian Sauvé. I'm the president of the National Police Federation. The NPF is the certified bargaining agent representing close to 20,000 frontline members of the RCMP across Canada and internationally. I would first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, which includes the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I want to start by affirming that the NPF and its membership recognize and decry racism, discrimination, and bias in Canada and globally. We believe ongoing conversations, peaceful protests, and education are an important expression of our shared desire and commitment to change. Racism is a very serious issue that must be addressed constructively and consistently. Our members enter policing because they want to make a positive difference in the communities they serve. They participate in anti-drug initiatives, youth education against gangs, anti-bullying programs. They volunteer to coach sports teams and raise funds and supplies for local food banks and shelters, amongst other initiatives. Our members have also all signed contracts with Canadians to protect their lives and their rights, even at the expense of their own. And I want to recognize all members of the RCMP and thank them for their continued dedicated service to Canadians. We support and protect every Canadian's right to be treated fairly and equally. In return, we ask for respect and fairness for our members who put their lives on the line every day. We are hearing more cases of members who are being yelled at, confronted, spat on, and assaulted while on duty. This is unacceptable. All Canadians should be free from harassment and assault, including those on the front line. Systemic racism is an issue across the country in all institutions. It is not just a policing issue. I feel policing is being unfairly spotlighted in an important greater conversation as police routinely address the issues experienced by our most vulnerable citizens when all other systems have failed. Increasingly, police officers are asked to carry too heavy a load due to dwindling resources and growing demand. Canadians and our members want to see more funding for frontline services that help alleviate pressures on vulnerable Canadians and, by extension, the police. All governments must do more to ensure that all communities have the frontline public safety and social services needed to help Canadians lead happy, healthy lives. For too long, our members have been called on to fill the gaps in the absence of properly funded mental health and social services, while at the same time, RCMP detachments are underfunded across the country. Our members are consistently told to do more with less when they are already overworked, overstressed, underrested, and underpaid. Between June 17th and 22nd of this year, Polaris Strategic Insights conducted a survey for the NPF of over 2,000 Canadians that shows 82% of Canadians agree that properly funding social services would significantly help alleviate thousands of potentially dangerous interactions between police and citizens every day. In that same survey, 78% agreed that both policing and social services need to be adequately funded. Let me repeat that because I think it's important. Canadians support their local RCMP and do not want to see police budgets defunded. They want properly funded social services alongside police budgets that allow the RCMP to focus on community safety. There are many success stories across Canada when governments provide necessary funding to support mental health and police partnerships. For example, police and crisis teams comprised of an RCMP officer and a registered psychiatric nurse respond to mental health calls together to intervene, assess, and support people having mental health crises. These teams have successfully provided much needed support within communities and municipalities in Saskatchewan and Manitoba recently announced continued funding for PACs just last week. As the role of RCMP members continues to expand, so do training and oversight requirements. And policing in Canada is one of the most heavily regulated professions. The NPF supports this oversight and believes that all complaints against members of the RCMP need to be investigated fully, fairly, transparently, and resolved in a timely and effective manner. This includes rare cases regarding use of force. Our members are highly trained in de-escalation and appropriate use of force to address potentially dangerous situations. The RCMP's own numbers show use of force is exceedingly rare, with an average of nearly 3 million calls of service annually and less than 0.1% resulting in any use of force. This demonstrates how seriously our members take de-escalation efforts to peacefully resolve potentially volatile situations and avoid use of force. The National Police Federation supports efforts by all levels of government to consider ways to better deliver policing services in Canada, and we welcome any opportunity to provide our input and expertise. However, we cannot judge the provision of police services only in the tense and brief moments where RCMP members are forced to respond to difficult situations. I would also like to add that when elected officials offer negative anti-police comments publicly or offer unguarded opinions on specific police cases in the news, it is not only unfair and irresponsible, but often contributes to sensationalized media coverage that negatively impacts public safety. It destabilizes community trust and confidence in the overwhelmingly excellent work our members do. I will end by saying that we must all work together to open ongoing lines of communication, to listen to one another, and ultimately find common ground and solutions that will ensure all Canadians feel equally and adequately protected by the law. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, President Sauvé. Ruth Goba, Executive Director, Black Legal Action Center. You have 7 minutes. You need to take your mic off mute. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I, first of all, would like to acknowledge that I am on the ancestral territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and in particular the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, and I am grateful to be here today. The Black Legal Action Centre is a not-for-profit corporation incorporated under the laws of Ontario. We are a specialty community legal clinic, and we opened our doors to the public in March of 2019. We are funded by Legal Aid Ontario, and we are governed by an independent volunteer community board of directors. Our mandate is to combat individual and systemic anti-Black racism across the province of Ontario. We achieve our mandate by providing free legal services to low and no income Black Ontarians who are facing racism, anti-Black racism, in housing, employment, education, social assistance, human rights, policing, and corrections. We engage in systemic advocacy through test case litigation, law reform, and community development. We also provide summary legal advice, brief services, and legal education. Black appreciates the opportunity to share our perspective on systemic racism in police services in Canada. SECU has a broad mandate, and we are asking you to consider these submissions within the context of that mandate. Through our work, Black regularly hears from members of the Black community who are victims of horrific police violence and white supremacy, and we all see it in the media. Anti-Black racism is real, and we know very tangibly how it impacts and devastates the Black community. Notwithstanding this, and notwithstanding the myriad reports from domestic and international bodies, the denial of the existence of anti-Black racism continues, most recently from the Commissioner of the RCMP. The existence of systemic anti-Black racism in Canadian society should not be a matter of dispute. This has to be the starting point for any genuine investigation into systemic racism in policing, and if public safety and trust is to be attained. There is unequivocal evidence of the fact that Black and Indigenous people are disproportionately impacted by police violence. The fact is that the police in this country, the Northwest Mounted Police, the force that preceded the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were created to control and intimidate Indigenous people and later Black people. Accordingly, we urge members of this committee police forces across the country, and others in positions of power to unequivocally acknowledge the existing, persistent structural inequalities and history of racism in this country. The ugly truth is that Canada was built on racism and discrimination, the theft of land and genocide of Indigenous people, the denial of the right to vote for women, the exploitation and enslavement of Black people to enrich others, the abuse and murder of Chinese people to build railroads, the internment of Japanese Canadians, the turning away of Jews trying to escape Nazism, the persecution of members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. These are but some of the examples that reveal Canada's history of violence, racism, and exclusion. In furtherance of the global call to end police violence perpetrated against Black people, and in furtherance of our mandate to combat anti-Black racism, Black has made the following demands. We've made these demands elsewhere, and we repeat them to this committee. Develop a nationwide mandatory policy on collection of data disaggregated by race, color, ethnic background, national origin, and other identities to determine where racial disparities exist for African Canadians so as to address them accordingly. Demilitarize the police. The use and deployment of specialized police units and their direct operational relationship to the Canadian military during protests disproportionately brutalizes racialized people, criminalizes dissent, and undermines democracy. Evidence from the United States reveals that there is a direct correlation between the militarization of police and increasing civilian deaths. The overhaul of police oversight. And while this speaks to Ontario, I would say that we are calling for this in the context of this committee across the country. So in Ontario, we have called for the immediate implementation of the report of the Independent Police Oversight Review and the repeal of the Comprehensive Ontario Police Services Act. Independent civilian police oversight bodies must be accountable to all members of the communities they serve. A clear and public commitment to zero deaths by police services across the country. An immediate reallocation of resources away from police budgets into public health, housing, transit, children's services, mental health resources, schools, employment, community centers, and other social service budgets. Complete transparency of police budgets across the country. A reallocation of resources, funding, and responsibility away from police and toward community-based models of safety, support, and prevention to ensure that those who are best equipped to deal with the majority of calls for assistance will not show up to people's homes and neighborhoods with uniforms, guns, and tasers. And I ask you to imagine if the professionals who respond to crises in our communities were mental health service providers, gender-based violence advocates, and social workers, what would be the outcome? In Ontario, we recently had the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, and I ask you, in that case, what would be the outcome if a mental health service provider trained in de-escalation, properly trained in de-escalation, had showed up to assist her mother when she called the police rather than 6 police officers with badges and guns? I submit to you that the outcome would have been quite different and that Regis Korchinski-Paquette would likely be alive today. While this committee is looking at policing specifically, I note the last point is related to your mandate to review corrections and correctional facilities. And I urge you to develop and implement national, I'm sorry, I've missed something. Oh no, sorry. I urge you to develop a national correction strategy to address and correct the disproportionately high rates of African Canadians in the correctional system and ensure anti-discriminatory and culturally specific services for African Canadian offenders. The need for broader systemic change is critical. We are at a new juncture in history that requires us to depart from old ways of thinking and build a more inclusive, non-oppressive system for all. Black Canadians, Indigenous people, and other racialized communities can no longer endure the injustice of a structure and culture of policing that is rooted in a history of violence and racism. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today.
Thank you. And you were 7 minutes right on.
Was I? Oh.
Yes, my goodness.
That's impressive. I didn't get to time it.
Yeah, I should get you to train our other witnesses. Then I wouldn't have to be interrupting people all the time. Anyways, President Zachary, you have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dwayne Zachary. I'm the president of the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association. I'm also chief peacekeeper of the Kahnawake Peacekeepers just outside on the south shore of Montreal. I'd like to start by recognizing the territory that I'm broadcasting from this afternoon. It's the territory of Kahnawake. The FNCPA is comprised of 36 self-administered First Nation police services across the country. It's made up of 21 services in Quebec, 9 in Ontario, 1 in Manitoba, 1 in Saskatchewan, 3 in Alberta, and 1 in British Columbia. First Nation communities across Canada come to the FNCPA, First Nation Chiefs of Police Association, asking for change. They're looking for change in their communities. They're looking for policing services that are commensurate with the needs of their community, services that are effective, services that reflect cultural, social, intrinsic diversity. They're looking for accountability. The First Nation Chiefs of Police strives to try and provide that to these communities, not only the 36 that we represent, but other First Nation communities across the country. Our mandate is the FNCPA exists to serve First Nation police services and First Nation territories across Canada by facilitating the highest level of professionalism and accountability in police services, all in a manner that reflects unique cultures, status, social circumstances, traditions, and aspirations of First Nations people. In the situation that we find ourselves in now, the First Nation Chiefs of Police Association is asking for change. We're looking for equality of police services across the country. We're looking for communities to have equality as well. We're asking for the government to recognize First Nation policing as an essential service, no longer as a program. No longer do we have to continually justify our existence. We want parity with other I guess what you'd call regular policing services. We're looking for full and adequate staffing. You know, we're looking for people to look at us and say, First Nation policing is on par with other police services, and that from an FNCPA perspective, we want people to recognize us as the experts in First Nation policing. You know, we live and we work in the communities that we serve. For decades, self-administered First Nation policing services in this country have been chronically underfunded. First Nation officers have been forced to work in conditions that no other officers in any other service have had to work in. And despite all of that, despite the underfunding, despite the lack of good working conditions, First Nation police officers have continually provided excellent services to the communities that they represent. You know, the severe underfunding of Indigenous policing creates issues across the country. For policing across this country should be uniform in the sense that everyone is safe and secure equally, not just certain parts of the population. Every day, First Nation Police Services works on building trust in their communities. And my feeling is that police services have lost that trust by the public at large. And without trust, it makes it very difficult for policing services to work well or to provide those services without the cloud that we're under at this moment. The FNCPA was extremely happy to hear Minister Blair say that First Nation policing services should be made an essential service, and that recognition has been long in coming, and that we've been overlooked for too long. And, you know, in a sense, First Nation policing has been treated with a benign neglect. The time for change is now. And I mean, it's sad to say that most times we end up in these situations and having these discussions when there's a tragedy. You know, but here we are. You know, we need to make change. Most First Nation communities in this country do not have a service that's representative of who they are. Most First Nation communities end up with a policing service that's
provided to them, and that service doesn't necessarily recognize the needs of the community. It's more of a situation where the policing services says, here's the service, here's what you get, right? In our situation, First Nation policing, we work with the community. We provide a service that's commensurate with the needs of the community. In the situation that I'm in, all of our officers are from this community. They're invested. They've been working here and living here their entire lives. So we need to make changes. We need to have an opportunity to work with our communities and the communities at large. You know, I understand that certain aspects of Indigenous policing and the model that we use may not be transferable to conventional policing, but there are definitely aspects of First Nation policing models that would work in certain communities. And I think now is the time to discuss it. For years and years and years, for decades, First Nation policing has had to be creative about the way they provide services to their communities. And I think by and large, we've been extremely successful at that. And we need to work together. We need to be accountable to the communities that we work in. We need to try and provide the services that they're required, that they require from us. The FNCPA participated in this process today because we wanted to offer a hand. We wanted to be part of the solution going forward. It's time now to work together. We have to develop a partnership. We have to go forward and be positive about things and get to a good place. We have to listen to people in the communities, and from that we'll be able to provide services that the communities need. We don't have to tell them what they need. We have to listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Zachary. With that, we're going to go to 5-minute rounds. And the first questioner is Mr. Paulus. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Sauvé, Mr. Zachary especially. Thank you for your testimonies. I'd like to underscore that I 100% support police force, may it be the RCMP or provincial police forces, as well as First Nation police forces. I've talked to many police officers lately. Many of them do their job. They want to maintain law and order for all Canadians, regardless of their background and race. That is very important to know. There are exceptions, of course, but the majority of police officers are really proud of their work. Now, I understand there are problems, and when there are problems, we have to find solutions. I remember when I was a member of the forces, I worked in many operations with police officers, and I saw that it was not always easy. Many interventions were high risk for many reasons. I remember I was in Labrador. There was an Indigenous reserve, and we were warned, do not go close to the reserve. It's dangerous. So that is the type of situation where you have to assess and wonder, why is there a risk to intervene on a reserve when we want to maintain safety for everybody? Now we're talking about body cams that could help us find answers when interventions occur. Those body cams would help us understand who was at fault. So, Mr. Sauvé, I would like to know, where are we with regard to the body cam implementation? I know the city of Calgary has already implemented body cams. Are you interested in body cams?
Wasn't sure when the question ended, but that's great. No, thank you for the question. I think, and we've been on record, the National Police Federation, as well as I believe the Commissioner and Public Safety Minister, in support of body cameras for the membership of the RCMP and the frontline membership of the RCMP. I think the challenge that we're running at right now, and as I mentioned earlier, is that our members have been told for years and years to do more with less, and it's a resourcing issue. So our discussions with Minister Blair and eventually through the Finance Committee, we will be proposing that you can't do this with internal funding. We have to find money for body cameras. Cameras cannot come at the expense of cops. And the challenge with body cameras, although yes, it is not a panacea, but yes, it does provide audio and video evidence of an interaction. I think this discussion that we're having here today really should be to figure out ways to avoid that interaction and ultimately come to a place where in policing in Canada, we don't need to rely on body cameras or video evidence to determine who's at fault and what's at fault. Really, we should be talking about how do we support social services in Canada to work in partnership with police service agencies in order to have adequate social support networks for all Canadians. So at present with body-worn cameras, I know the NPF has been engaged by the RCMP. COVID has been a bit of a challenge having our first get-together to discuss the specifics of the rollout of that. For example, how do we comply with privacy? Can you turn it off when you go to the bathroom or receive a phone call from your significant other or your children? Those types of things. Are they on 24/7? So really, we're just looking at those details, but I would expect it would be fairly quick.
1 minute left, Mr.
Monsieur Zachary.
Mr. Zachary, on your end. Okay, so I'm from Quebec. And in Quebec, relations between Indigenous Quebec and Sûreté du Québec are fine. From what I know, I believe there are good relations. Things are going well. And that, if that's the case, is there a model, a working model that could be presented to other provinces or to the RCMP, or am I wrong here?
Seconds, that would be helpful.
Come on. Hi. Yeah. On your question, I think that relations between First Nation police services and the Sûreté de Québec are going quite well. It's been an evolution, right? It wasn't always that way. We had to work really hard to get to where we're at. And I think that First Nation communities, there's still a lot of work that has to be done. And we're not close yet. And the services that are provided here in Quebec generally are by First Nation police services. So in that regard, we're in a better place. It's just we have support service from the Sûreté de Québec, right, for most of the First Nation services. So working in partnership, I think, is always the way to go. And definitely there's a model that can be gleaned from all of this.
Thank you, Mr. Zachary. That was a long 15 seconds. Mr. Fergus, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your presentations. Before I ask my question to Ms. Goba, I feel obliged to say that I think it's entirely reasonable for us to question and to examine and to put spotlight on police services and the question of systemic discrimination for the simple reason that we give license to our police services to use lethal force. And as a Black man, I certainly, who runs a risk, comparatively 700% risk of suffering lethally from the use of force. To me, it seems, just because of the color of my skin, it just seems entirely normal that I would want to question this issue. My question to you, Dr. Goba, Ms. Goba rather, is regarding disaggregated data. We've had a number of witnesses talk about the importance of disaggregated data. I was wondering, given your experience, would you be able to point us in the direction of any jurisdictions that have successfully used disaggregated data in which they were to take actions or use that data to take concrete actions, which led to an improvement in terms of reducing that differentiation, which leads to systemic discrimination?
Okay, in the States, data is collected, but I can point to an example right here in Ontario, where the collection of disaggregated data allowed for the implementation of a system that I believe will assist with the elimination of inequity. And that the example is in education, but recently, if you live in Ontario, maybe you have seen in the media all of the discussions around the Peel District School Board. And one of the things that the Peel District School Board did was collect disaggregated data on the impact of streaming on the students in the board. And it showed atrocious disparity between how white students were afforded the opportunity to enter into academic courses, and Black students were streamed and disproportionately put in apprenticeships and other general level courses. The result of having that information allowed the ministry to provide, it provided evidence to show that it wasn't just anecdotal, that it wasn't just, Black students and Black parents saying, you're being unfair. It showed the disproportionality based on the numbers in the school that, I think it was 20-something% of the students who were streamed were Black when they only comprised a much smaller portion of the entire student body. So, and we've seen it as well in the collection of health data in the United States, actually, right, around COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And where data is collected, you are able to understand where the disparity is, where the difference is, and you can fix it. And so that is why Black consistently calls for the collection of data, not just in policing, but in education, where it's made a difference, and it will make a difference, I think, in the Peel District School Board, in healthcare, in employment. And we call for data collection, not just by government, but by the private sector as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really do believe that you can't change what you can't measure. So
exactly.
I'm a firm believer in disaggregated data. My next question is for Mr. Zachary. And thank you very much for talking about the importance of First Nation policing, police services. I was wondering if you could share with the committee some of the best practices that a member of a First Nation police service was a member of your association, some of the best practices, because we have limited time, maybe one or two best practices that you would like the committee to hear about to making sure that we can make that recommendation going forward.
We're back on to the impossible question with 12 seconds left.
Oh, well, I'm terribly sorry.
So maybe what I can say is that we do have some best practices, and if you'd like to discuss it, absolutely. I think.
Would you be able to share that with the committee?
Can you send them in to the committee?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if it would be useful, I will yield my time, my 2 minutes to Mr. Fergus so that this question could be answered.
Okay, that's very generous on the part of Mr. Anand-Sanghri. So you've got 2 minutes further 2 minutes then.
Okay, so I don't think I'll need the entire 2 minutes, only because I think that 2 minutes doesn't do it justice, and I think it's probably better for me to submit something about the best practices and some of the way we go about our models. Each First Nation community is unique, and each First Nation police service is developing a model based on the community they serve. No two First Nation communities are identical. So each one, even if they are similar, have differences, right? Because I'm from a community called Ganawage. It's a Mohawk community. About an hour away, we have Aguizasne, right? And they're both Mohawk communities, but they're entirely different. And the models that we use are different, but they're applicable in our territory. So I think First Nation policing, what we're really good at is being creative about the way we provide our services, because generally speaking, we're underfunded, we don't have resources, so we have to come up with creative ways of being able to provide services to the communities that we do serve. And I think in that regard, it's been a really big win for us. I mean, and for everybody else, our funding partners included, because it's basically you're getting policing for pennies on the dollar in comparison. So when you talk about defunding police, I know that's been out there a lot. First Nation policing is kind of the defunded model of policing, right? Because we don't have a lot to work with, but we go out there and do the best that we can with the resources and come up with creative ways of providing services to our people.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Thank you.
And Mr. Anand-Sanghri. Madame Michaud, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everyone for appearing before the committee. I appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank the translators who are doing some excellent work for us, for those of us who are speaking French at the committee today. Mr. Zachary, you made a number of recommendations with respect to Indigenous police or Aboriginal police services. You talked about better coordination but among better training, awareness on communities, and complete training for Aboriginal police officers. Now, often we talk about police training for police officers, but you feel that the training provided specifically to Indigenous police officers is not complete. Why do you feel that way?
Because it seems like oftentimes we're treated as second-class citizens in the policing realm. Right? There's not a lot of training that's necessarily available for First Nation police departments. There's not a lot of advanced training that's out there. Sometimes, like for example, in the province of Quebec, First Nation policing is considered only a level 1. That's basic police services. Like you can answer the phone 24 hours a day. That's it. But there are so many First Nation services in this province that provide so many other services that we've had to be creative and able to, in order to be able to provide that type of service. And then again, when you look at it, the training institutions, they're providing training based on research that they've done. And what happens is when we send our officers, when they end up coming back to the community, we have to make adjustments so that they're ready to provide those the trainings that they learned to our community. So for the Kahnawake Peacekeepers, we send all of our officers to the RCMP Training Academy at Depot Division in Saskatchewan, right? And as far as I'm concerned, that's a great training institution, and our officers are excellent. But before we put them out in our community, we also have our own field training program that adjusts the training that they've learned, so that way we're providing true community policing to our territory.
Merci.
Thank you. Oftentimes we talk about the importance of police services, and I agree with that. They're absolutely essential. This is a bit of a delicate question because I listened to Ms. Michel earlier from the Quebec Native Women's Association, and she talked about women being victims of violence, and oftentimes she said they hesitate to make a complaint or file a complaint in smaller communities because maybe the police officer is a brother, a cousin, an uncle, and so there is a reluctance to lodge a complaint. So how do we avoid falling into that kind of a trap, and what do we do to reestablish the link of confidence that needs to exist between the police officer and the community?
So I believe that we have to make change, right? I had mentioned it before. I think that First Nation communities should have their own First Nation service providing services to the community. But having said that, our model's not perfect and we need to make adjustments. And I believe that every First Nation police service must work every day to develop trust in their community, right? You have to walk the walk. You can't just go out there and police based on what you want to do. You have to police based on what the community needs. And every day you have to build that trust. And I know that there is a reluctance sometimes. And in that regard, that's where I think partnerships come into play. We have to be able to develop the partnerships with the services that we have in our community. And if we don't have the services, we have to ask ourselves, why don't we have these services if they're a necessity, right? So there's a lot of areas where there are huge gaps, especially in First Nation communities, and especially when it comes to providing services. The gaps sometimes are immense, and we have to figure out a way to bridge those gaps in order to provide the services that people in each of these territories need. I mean, I'm a firm believer that without developing partnerships, it will be very difficult for us to go forward and make these changes that we're all talking about today, right? We have to be able to recognize that there's privilege in this country, and sometimes that privilege, with it comes power, and people have to be willing to relinquish the power in order to make people more equal. And in that in that regard, we'll start to be able to provide people with more services, I believe, and we'll be able to be more open at seeing what the needs are.
Okay, we're going to have to stop it there, Madame Michaud. Mr. Harris, 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'll first have a question for Chief Zachary. And of course, we're 30 years out in First Nations policing, and we're still talking about making it an essential service. We know it's been undervalued, under-resourced institutionally, and underfunded. And I think we'll have some recommendations from this committee about that before it's all over. But can I ask, take advantage of your presence, I suppose, and your experience, both as a chief and as the president of the organization? Is there a place for Indigenous policing or First Nations policing in urban areas? We have large populations in some areas, particularly out west in Winnipeg and Edmonton and other places. Is there a model that would work in an urban area, perhaps either standalone or in integrated with the local police force? That has any thought been given to that? Is that something that obviously is a different type of community, but is that something that you see a value in as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great question. It's one that I've been asked a number of times, and I do believe that the First Nation policing model is a model that can be adapted for different situations. Do I think that it's a standalone model necessarily in large urban areas? That would have to be evaluated. But I definitely think that many police services could stand to have an integrated unit that would work specifically in certain types of communities, right? And it would be very similar to the model that we use in First Nation policing services, and I think that developing the partnership between First Nation policing and for lack of a better term, mainstream policing would help to further that cause.
Thank you. And what about just one question which comes up occasionally? We're talking about making an essential service. Is civilian oversight an issue that's, as we see in other police forces, is that an issue for First Nations policing as well?
I think that First Nation policing is one of the most accountable services that's out there. I mean, we have to be accountable to our community every single day. We have civilian oversight already, and we've had here in Kahnawake, we've had civilian oversight for decades, and the province is just coming online now with that type of thing. So yeah, I think oversight is necessary, and I think we all have to start moving towards that.
Thank you. I have a question for Black Legal Services, Black Legal Action Center, Ruth Goba. You've a lot of experience as a human rights commissioner as well, and dealing with these issues. When you talked about data, there's another type of data that comes up, of course, in these matters, and that has to do with racial profiling and carding. We've heard complaints about that still being an issue in Halifax from a witness yesterday. Is that issue still alive in terms of police forces in Ontario in particular, because that's your jurisdiction? Is that something you're still concerned about?
You're on your mute.
I'm sorry. I keep putting it on mute so that I don't disturb anybody.
You're not alone.
Absolutely, it is still an issue. And I can tell you that at Black, we receive, as I said, we receive calls from people across the province because we serve the province. And we receive calls regularly from people who are experiencing or have experienced racial profiling by police. And I can tell you that several years ago, when I was sitting as interim chief, the issue of carding was all over the news. And there were different names for it. There was carding, there was street checks, and there was some legislative reform put in place by the then government, the then provincial government. But what was unfortunate about it is that while there was a lot of talk about it, and while there were reforms put in place, on the ground, the things did not change for the Black community. They were profiled before the term street check and carding existed, and have been speaking about it for decades, and they continue to be profiled in the same way. So the language doesn't actually change what's happening on the ground. So I would say to you, yes, it is definitely, it continues to be a problem experienced by our community.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We now go to the 2-minute, we'll call it the lightning round, I suppose. Mr. Morrison, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the 3 witnesses this afternoon. Now, my question will go to Brian Sauvé. Hey, Brian, there's been a lot of reports out about the I guess the members of the RCMP raising concerns about lack of resources, and it's actually getting into a safety issue. I wonder if you can elaborate on the current situation and how can the NPF resolve some of these issues?
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Resourcing has been a challenge in the RCMP for the last 5 years, and if not longer. And I think a lot of it has to do with we really haven't adopted any police resource methodology. So when our contracting partners are speaking about a community of 5,000 or 10,000 people, the RCMP won't necessarily have a number of, service level 1, 2, 3. This is the number of cops that you have. You add in the fact that we have been in effectively a wage freeze since 2017, and if you add in the Expenditure Restraint Act going back to 2010, and we are not the most attractive police employer today. If I was a young guy looking at joining a police service, would I choose Toronto, where I don't have to move and I can have a sustainable family with a spouse that can have a full-time career, or would I choose the RCMP and make considerably less amount of money and possibly have to move around the country? So I think we really need, A, to deal with the compensation issues, and B, need to look at what is our resource methodology, how are we going to deploy our members into what communities and at what resource levels in order to sustain those memberships' careers, not to overwork them, allow them to take time off and decompress and use time away from work.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. We're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Angus Angry, you were a generous MP, and you're from Scarborough. Do you still want to ask a 1-minute question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just thank the witnesses, and this is directed to Ruth Goba. I know the Black has just established, doing great work. If there's one thing that the federal government could do with respect to policing to change the trajectory and the history, what would that be?
I think I would call on the federal government to ensure the data collection, right? I think that we really need to know exactly what's happening. There was a recent report today, actually, or just this week from CBC that is looking at some of the data, and it shows that for the Indigenous and the Black community, the percentage of people killed by police across the country for only those 2 communities is significantly greater than their percentage in the population as a whole. And for all other groups, that number is the reverse, right? And so I think we need to know exactly what's happening. And I also think that we need to, I know you asked me for one thing, but the demilitarization is also critical.
He's also run 1 minute into about 3.
Okay. Last time I'm
going to give this guy an even break. My goodness, even if he is from Scarborough. Okay, with that, Mr. Vidal, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to just recognize and thank all the witnesses for appearing today. Your testimony is valuable. Mr. Sauvé, earlier today we had a witness, he was a criminologist, Mr. Prant. He talked to us about an issue within the RCMP where they send recruits up into northern communities with very little training, maybe adding to that retention problem that you talked about a little bit earlier. A lot of members leave very quickly after being appointed was kind of the testimony that he gave. I think there's also another barrier that I've noticed in northern Saskatchewan that's created by sending young members into northern rural remote communities to so-called gain experience when they have significant language and cultural differences that they have to overcome, and then they're there for a short time. I'm just wondering if I could get you to comment on that in the time that I have here.
For sure, thank you. I think obviously yes, we do send our young members from who graduate from Depot all over Canada, and we part of this conversation, part of the conversation I should have you having with the commissioner is how can we improve the ability to deploy our resources to set those members up for success. So those that get into Depot and graduate Depot are really the best of the best, and we need to ensure that they are being set up within the RCMP and within the communities that they go to for success. So how can we make that better? How can we do that better? And I think definitely ongoing conversations about that, our recruiting and our training modules are definitely something we're open to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. I'm sure with 30 seconds left, you're not going to be able to formulate another question. With that, Madame Demov, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Chief Zachary, my question is for you. First, I note you're Chief Peacekeeper. I think just the title in its own speaks a lot to the way that you treat policing in your nation. When it comes to the government establishing First Nations policing as essential service, you mentioned training. Should there be, and so I'm going to give you this question. You won't have time to answer. Please send us what you can't answer in writing. Should there be specialized training for, like consistent specialized training? Oversight. I know that there's been an issue at Six Nations. Do you have any thoughts on how we provide oversight for First Nations policing? How do we respect community differences as we establish it? Provinces are the only ones who can certify peace officers, and I know there's been issues with bylaws on reserve, especially during COVID and enforcement. So how can we take all of that into account as we establish First Nations policing as an essential service?
About 1 minute.
Yeah, so that's a huge question, and it's an excellent question. I think definitely specialized training is probably in the cards for the future, right? I mean, let's be realistic about things. We have to make a huge change here in this country, and we have to start providing services that our communities and our people need. You know, you need to have big changes, and without developing the trust from the people that you serve, you're not going to get anywhere. And all of this stuff is all tied in to everything that we do every single day. So when I do make my submission, I'll be sure to have all of that stuff incorporated into the answer. But yes, there are huge implications here, and specialized training, I feel, is definitely the way to go.
Thank you, Madame Demov. 1 minute, Madame Michaud, and then 1 minute, Mr. Harris.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 1 minute, Ms. Goba, I'll give you the opportunity to finish your answer to my colleague Gary. After all this, a report will be tabled in Parliament for the government to reply. So what do you expect? What concrete action should the government take to fight systemic racism, put an end to it?
Okay, I'm not getting any interpretation, and I am sorry, je ne parle pas français. I don't speak French, and I'm not getting the interpretation.
Are you on the? There's a little icon at the bottom of your screen with a world icon, and it goes bilingual English and French.
Oh,
if you open that,
okay.
it should be on English.
Yes, okay.
And then you'll get translation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get the interpretation. I'm very sorry about that.
Okay. I'm sorry, Christina. I'm going to not ask her to answer that question.
I apologize.
Okay. Well, that's all right. Final question to Mr. Harris. 1 minute. You're on mute, Jack. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It's hard to ask and get a question answered in a minute, but I do want to say to my friend Brian Solvay that I appreciate his presence here today, and I think, understand that your members have a tough road, particularly when, as was discussed, going into small rural communities, often with a two-man detachment or a two-person detachment. These are issues that we're very concerned about, and as we have talked before, you did say you had a concern about how independent assessments are done of use of force by other resources. And I wonder if you could send us your thoughts on that, because it was an important thing that you brought to our attention when we met. So I just want to thank you for appearing and wish you well and your organization well in your negotiations coming up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Harris. Yes, we'll put something together for you with respect to a number of the topics discussed today and get it into the committee. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to thank our witnesses for coming together. The reason to colleagues and to witnesses, the reason that I'm kind of rushing things along on a Friday afternoon, and we're already 15 minutes over time, is that in order to put this together, it takes an enormous number of resources, primarily people resources, and there are people here that have worked heroically in order to be able to put these 2 days together. And for those of you who get a chance to send them a note, I think that would be appropriate. And those who want to send a virtual applause, you're more than welcome. I think that would be more than appropriate. This is, as we just seem to be going from extraordinary panel to extraordinary panel to extraordinary panel, and this has been in that vein. I want to thank the witnesses for their presence here, and your contribution to this study is very impressive and will be very useful and will be incorporated into our ultimate report and recommendations. With that, I just want to wish colleagues a good weekend, but also take note that on Friday, the subcommittee is meeting. That notice has gone out because of the efficiency of our clerk. And so I look forward to virtually meeting with our subcommittee colleagues, and we will then chart a path forward for the rest of this study.
Chair?
So, yes, Madame Dalma.
I wonder, we're not meeting for a week, if all the parties could give some thought if they have additional witnesses that they want to submit so that we don't delay any further. So perhaps we could be thinking about that now.
And the other thing I'd like you to think about is I hate cutting people off, but it seems like all I do is cut people off. So we may have to look at the time allocations as well, and the paneling allocation as well. So those are things that if you could communicate to your relevant party person, I would appreciate, and then we will have a very useful subcommittee meeting. Again, thank you so much, and have a good and safe weekend.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.